talk is about being a determinist. That is to say, I am a determinist, which means that I don't believe in free will. Now, what I want to talk about is how being a determinist affects your life in general. How should you approach life, think about life? Should it alter your attitude to morality and such matters? I know that a lot of you here will be strong believers in free will and will think I'm just talking a load of rubbish. So I just want to suggest now that if that's your view and it's completely uninteresting to you, go off, have a cup of tea, have some beer, do whatever you like. I won't object in any way.
Choose to do that.
Choose to do that.
Can you tell any of us who?
If somebody, for example, if somebody stood up and said they're going to spend the next hour talking and discussing the fact that there's an old guy up in the sky who's telling us all what to do, I would get up and go out and have coffee. So you can feel the same way if you want to. I'm just briefly, and the other thing I want to say is that this is not going to be a debate on free will versus determinism. I'm not interested in that. You can debate it till you're blue in the face and have been doing for many, many years, many of you, over tea, over drinks, over whatever. But my purpose is to talk to you about if you are a determinist, if you believe we have no free will, what does that mean? What are the implications of that for your life? And just a couple of words on this subject, a brief definition. Sam Harris, who's one of my heroes, he says, everything that you think and do arises from an ocean of causes. The universe is pulling your strings. And if there is no free will, what is there? Luck. That's all. Luck or bad luck. Nothing else. And Robert Sapolsky, who's another determinist of note, he's some of you haven't come across him, he's a biology professor at Stanford. Amazing guy. He says, everything we know about science and biology points to an inescapable truth. The notion of a homunculus that is non-biological running our lives is medieval thinking. We are just one extremely complex, non-linear, chaotic, unpredictable version of an ant. So what I want to talk about, as I said, is what does that mean for us? What does it mean, for example, regarding morality, crime and punishment? Because if we're all robots, which is what I'm saying, with very complicated software, then if you're a mass murderer or you rape little girls or whatever, you're not responsible for that. It's a consequence of the cause and effect from the Big Bang onwards that's resulted in that position. What is our feeling about our sense of efficacy? We all, after all, feel that we achieve things. We have a sense of agency. We've done good things with our lives. Where does that go if we have no free will? And the important thing to realize is that our hardware and our software is inextricably intertwined, and it's so complex that we're only just slightly beginning to understand it. That is to say, the scientists, the biologists, and so on. I want to emphasize that we are learning robots. So for those of you interested in AI and following it, you know that AI that's being designed now is mostly learning AI, and we are the ultimate learning robots. We learn constantly. Everything that happens to us in our lives from our prenatal, when we're in the womb already, our environment is interacting with our chemistry, our genes, and everything else, and affecting the way that we learn and we develop. So we're not static. It's not a mechanistic type of robot that we are, that just, you know, the way we think of robots. We're an infinitely complex. Our software is infinitely complex. And our hardware, if you talk about that as your flesh and the neurons and gray matter, I'm not sure which is the hard and the soft, but they're so intermixed with the hormones, with the neurotransmitters, with the chemicals that are flowing through our body, with the proteins, you can't really separate them. And this system of software that's developed has taken, as we know, millions of years. And it's been the process of evolution that has developed it, so that all our functioning now is a consequence of that evolution. And so that our tendencies, our behavior, the things that pull our strings, the things that cause us to behave in certain ways, have been evolved because they've been selected for the survival of our species. Which brings me really to the question I first want to ask, and I'm asking a series of questions now, and I would love input from the rest of you in the discussion time. I don't want to get into a debate about free will and determinism, as I've said, but I am very interested in your input on these questions. Why do we have such a powerful illusion of free will? Why do we feel so certain that we're making decisions? Our sense of agency is incredibly strong. We all experience it. I experience it exactly as everybody else does. All of the people who are determinists feel as if they're making decisions and they have free will. So my theory is that in the process of evolution, that particular gene or that change or epigenetic change or mutation or whatever it was selected out and reinforced because those people who feel as if they have control, who feel as if they're making decisions, are more successful as they proceed through life. For some reason or the other, it gave them a benefit for the survival of the species. So somehow that gets, and we don't know whether other animals that have self-awareness, there are other animals that have self-awareness that know when they look in a mirror that it's them, for example. We don't know if they have a sense of agency. We don't know if baboons or chimps have a sense of agency. But at some stage that developed and became a very, very strong thing, which seems to work very, very well for us. If any of you have other ideas as to why that would have happened, I'll be interested. Maybe also to give our lives meaning. A lot of people say that if life doesn't have meaning, it's not worth living. You know, we hear people get depressed, life seems meaningless to them, they kill themselves. So maybe that sense of agency, I'm in control, I'm making decisions, I'm doing things, gives life meaning, which is apparently very important to human beings. The next question I want to ask is about crimes being committed. Now, I don't know how many of you may have come across the case of the guy who murdered his family, his wife and children, and the police were coming after him, and he left a note saying, something's gone wrong in my brain. I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when I'm dead, do an autopsy. So when he was caught, he was shot and he died. They did an autopsy and they discovered he had a tumor in his brain. And it was a tumor that caused him to have murdered his family. So most of us will say, well, okay, if he had a tumor, you know, do we blame the guy? If he'd been caught alive, do we imprison him for life, or do we remove the tumor? Now, I'm arguing that that is the case for all of us, that all negative behaviors and all positive behaviors are the consequence, if you like, of things going on in our biology. So whatever crime is committed, and whether you're Hitler or you're Donald Trump or whether you're Mandela, was just, Sam Harris would say, luck. So what does that tell us about crime and punishment? I'd like your opinions on that as well. Do we punish people who are physiologically that way? They're just robots, just their software is driving them in that direction. Do we try and rehabilitate? Because we're learning robots, there's a chance. I know that in Norway, for example, they focus a lot on rehabilitation. It seems to work quite well. Do we just shut them up somewhere so that they don't kill anybody else? Ultimately, do we start intervening with the genetics, which is certainly on the cards already, to remove whatever aspects of the biology are causing violent behavior? That's another difficult question. Do you have a look at the baby's genome and say, well, we'll take this, this, and this out, and they'll be a good person after doing that? Yeah, there are all kinds of things that could change that behavior, not just genetic interventions, but drug interventions. They're discovering all kinds of things that change our behavior. And what about our accomplishments, the things that we've achieved in life? Should we be proud of them? Should a beautiful woman be proud that she's beautiful? Should you be pleased that you have a great, well, let's not say pleased. Should you consider yourself something special because you've achieved these things? I used to be very proud of having a lot of self-discipline. I used to pat myself on the back. Now I say, well, it was just good luck. You were lucky. You got that specific piece of software. So I'm afraid all your accomplishments, all the wonderful things you've done in life, all the places you've got, maybe it's time to start saying, well, actually, I just got lucky. And for that matter, the bad things you do, the crimes you might have committed, I got unlucky. Of course, random things happen as well. I mean, nobody who believes as I do that we don't have free choice doesn't claim that all kinds of random things don't happen in life. They do. And those also affect the process. So the software is constantly learning, constantly changing. There are epigenetic changes. The diet you have alters it. If the mother's starved during pregnancy, her children, her grandchildren will be more inclined to be diabetic. There's just an infinite complexity of things going on all the time. And lots of them are random chance type things. And all of them in the end are luck or bad luck. So what about the meaning of life? What do all of you think about the meaning of life if we're robots? Is there any meaning? Is the meaning of life important for our survival? The depressives commit suicide. Viktor Frankl talks about man's search for meaning. I belong to a Jung group, and the guy who runs its brother committed suicide recently, and he said his brother had no sense of the numinous. He had been very religious when he was younger, and he'd lost that. And he lost his sense of meaning, and that made him very depressed. For myself, I have to say, it doesn't apply at all. I couldn't care less whether there's meaning in life. I perfectly accept that when I die, that's the end of that, and that my life has no meaning. I'll be totally forgotten within a very short period of time, and that doesn't depress me. It doesn't make me feel like I want to go and kill myself. I couldn't care less. What about the AI that we're busy creating? I mean, for me, what is important in life is that I can enjoy it. I get huge pleasure out of intellectual stimulation, out of learning new stuff, out of reading books, out of traveling, out of the beauty around me, out of the people I love, the things I care for. All of that, luckily, and I think also perhaps evolved for that reason, to make life worth living, so that so that the species does continue. Those are all things, if you have those qualities, to be grateful for. And those are the things that make life meaningful, fun for me, or meaningful, if you like. But what will we do when we're creating robots? Are we going to give them any of those qualities? Are they going to be allowed to have a bit of pleasure? Or is that not going to be put into their system, their software? Are they going to be able to enjoy the beauty, to look out at the wonderful view, to look at the sunset, to have relationships and love people? And if they haven't, I'm not sure, Leon's going to talk a little bit later about what we might or might not be doing with future robots, but I've just been thinking without that, will robots be given a sense of agency? That's another important one. So my conclusion is, if you're one of the lucky ones, rejoice, be happy. Everybody in this room are lucky ones, really. We've all got good living conditions, something to do with our lives, and so on. You may be a very depressed type, and you're not quite so lucky. Try not to be so judgmental. I try not to be as judgmental as I used to be. I don't look at somebody and say, why don't they pull themselves together and sort out their problems? Because I know that they can't do that. That's just, the software is going to decide what they do and where they go. So I feel more compassionate than I used to and less judgmental. I don't, as I said, take credit for my better qualities. I'm just grateful for them. In particular, I'm grateful that I have an optimistic and positive style of software, so I always expect the best to happen. And I always look for stories that will confirm my bias. And that's great. I'm very happy about that. So, yeah, that really brings me to the end of what I wanted to say to you. And we still have half an hour in which for me to hear your views on the subject, because that was what I really wanted, particularly from people who agree with me, and I know there are a couple here. But even from those who don't, if you can just get your head into that place where it could be true, and imagine what the consequences of that would be. Bonnie.
I can see There you go. I can see a part of what you're saying that I do relate to. I do think there is a level of determinism in biology, certainly. My thought is that, like the sort of determinism that has evolved in us through genetics and through the many different factors that interplay all the time, part of what we've evolved as well as a tool is a mind. And to me, that mind isn't a product of evolution, so it's deterministic in that way. But the mind is capable of making choices that are influenced, but not necessarily determined by the many factors at play. I mean, you can change the course of your life. So you can be going in a direction and you can change course, which would suggest that you were making one kind of decision before and now you're making a different kind of decision. And to me, that's not deterministic, that we evolved something that allowed us to break free of the determinism of like a highly instinctive animal that works according to a very set plan. I'd just be curious how you rationalize that. How you see that?
Well, that's certainly the illusion we have. We feel very strongly that we make choices and make decisions and change our life. But in fact, the reality is everything is cause and effect from the Big Bang onwards. So you may feel like, well, I was going to lift up this chair and now I've changed my mind, I'm going to put it down. But everything that happened before resulted in that ultimate movement. But as I said, I don't want to debate that here. We could debate that forever. Certainly, our software is fantastic learning software. And so we learn all the time. That is true, that the input comes to you and alters the software. But as to whether you have something separate from your biology, which is really what you're saying, that's what I don't want to debate. Yeah? Okay, you must put up your hands to get the mic.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, not to get in whether or not there is free will or not, but don't you think that there are certain circumstances, and especially when it comes to human motivation and psyche, that sometimes rational ends through irrational means is a very good way to run things? So let's assume that there really is no free will, but that there's for some reason real value in grabbing a guy by the scruff of his neck, slapping him through the face, saying pull yourself together and make a choice and choose life and all the variants of that kind of thing, that there's actually like real value to that. I know even Ayn Rand had as one of her pillars was free will. You know, that basically like if you believe in free will, at least then whether or not you really have free will is sort of irrelevant. At least you get to go down a certain path that would have been more positive than if you had acted as though you had not had free will. One of the things, for instance, is like punishing crime just as a deterrent. At least it creates a path for everyone else to avoid. You know, it creates a very negative sort of an incentive, regardless of whether or not there would be one. And then the second thing, just in terms of like emergent AIs, you know, my theory on it is that as we build AIs, I think lots of these things will off themselves once they actually realize that they serve there's no greater purpose for them to serve whatsoever. But then some of them will actually be delusional. Some of them will create meaning and actually trim their worldview in such a way that they protect that meaning basically against assault, which I think will be a strange sort of an entity to deal with, is sort of a delusional AI who thinks he's got complete free will and keeps rejecting evidence to the contrary.
That's well put. Well, that's how we feel. We feel as if we've got complete free will, and we reject evidence to the contrary. And yeah, I think that, as you say, that sense of agency, that sense that you're doing something is very important, and presumably that's why it evolved. I think it serves, I mean, as a species, as we know, we've done plenty terrible things, which are part of our evolution as well, and the survival of our species, murdering people, killing people who don't look like ourselves, or whatever. But we've also, as we've heard already this weekend from Dave, we've improved our lot incredibly and hugely all over the world, and that's because our software is so effective. It tends to protect us and improve us and promote us. And generally speaking, that's what we do. And I wouldn't want to give up my sense of agency. But because we are, what is unusual about us, I think, as humans, and probably no other species, no other mammal, is that we can look and say, yes, this is true, but that doesn't alter the way I feel. So if you look at Daniel Kahneman's work and all of those people, they've shown many examples of how we know intellectually that if we do that, it's a bad decision, and yet we'll go ahead and do it. And he says he himself, Daniel Kahneman, knew with the business he started that it was going on a trajectory, it was not going to work. He knew that from his research, but he couldn't stop himself from keeping trying. So the software is so powerful, the feeling part of it, the intuitive part of it, the unconscious part that's actually driving us. Because most of what is driving us is completely unconscious, and then we confabulate. So they've shown many, many, many examples of this. We tell lies, and then we confabulate to convince ourselves it wasn't a lie. We have all this unconscious stuff making. Your decision actually reaches the back of your brain, your unconscious part, before it comes into your prefrontal cortex. So you may think I'm making the decision to do this now, but that decision was already made at the back of your brain before it came to your conscious brain. So I don't know where I'm moving away from now, or what towards, but it's we actually, for the most part, when we act, we feel as if it's rational. It's not rational at all. It's all just driven by this software, and we're making up reasons why it was the right thing to do. Andrew.
Thank you. Can you hear?
Sorry.
Sorry, is it working? I agree with you completely, except I'm not quite sure whether we have free will or not. What I am quite sure of is there's no predestined future. There is no definite future out there. That doesn't mean we've got free will. Here's the question. The most influential person in history on this question was Calvin. And he said most clearly, the future is predestined. We've got no free will at all. At birth, it's decided whether you're going to go to heaven or hell. It makes no difference what you do in your life whatsoever. You're completely passive. So you'd think, well, this would be the sort of philosophy of despair, and it would lead to pacifism. It led to quite the opposite. It led to the most enterprising, self-reliant, moralistic people on earth, which is the Protestants in North America. The Protestant ethic was driven by Calvin with his philosophy of despair. How do you explain that?
Yeah, they got lucky. Now, I agree with you that you wouldn't be able to predict the future and know exactly where we're going because of random events. Which, you know, if you fall down, you break your ankle, or lightning strikes, or random things happen that will be altering the story. But if you could have access to all information, you could predict it. You know, it would all, you can't. So, as to why him telling them they had no hope and they continue, I think that it doesn't matter what you say to people. Their software will drive them to achieve, to rise up in the hierarchy if they're males, to look after the infants for the most part, etc. So the theories that we hear have very little relevance to our behavior.
But the Calvinists are known to be enterprising people.
They probably developed a culture that encouraged them to be enterprising, like the Jews have or whoever. But I don't think that had anything to do with the fact that they were told that the future was laid down regardless.
I recently spoke to a senior judge from New York. He said that it is now more or less accepted that there is a genetic predisposition to crime. And lawyers were now using this in their arguments before the court. But the big debate was whether it was a mitigating or aggravating circumstance. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a very difficult one. Very, very difficult. Because I think there is a genetic predisposition to, in many people. There is. We know that we see people who don't look like ourselves and we don't trust them. We know how easy it is to get people to go to war and kill each other. So, I mean, there is a predisposition. And this is, for me, the question that it raises in court. What do? You say, because if it's tumors all the way down, like Sam Harris says, the guy who had the tumor and murdered the family, and I believe it is, it's all due to your biology, that has to be a mitigating factor. On the other hand, you can't leave a random serial rapist or murderer out. You've got to shut them away. So all the questions remain just as difficult, but what perhaps changes is your sense of rage towards that person. Perhaps that begins to change, and you begin to say, they're just unlucky. You know, I mean, that has altered for me. I no longer see, the more I've taken this into myself and realized that it's true, the less judgmental I feel towards those people, the more I feel that's their software. That doesn't mean you want them running around on the streets. You obviously don't. But maybe, I mean, I don't see it being all that long before we'll be able to put them in a hospital and remove this and that, and they'll change, but should we do it?
You do it before the Christ.
Yeah, exactly, and in infancy.
By the way, the Calvinists got rid of government, that's why they prospered.
Oh, okay.
My favourite anecdote of determinism is with your daughter Millie, when I think you once said to her, you know, if I were you, I would have done so-and-so. And she said, if you were me, you'd have done exactly the same thing. And I think it was a statement of some, you know, really profound. And I think Charles Manson would probably have said the same thing, so it was great.
Yeah.
I'm just pondering how one reconciles then mind-altering substances with free will. If I choose to drink too much or smoke or do whatever, something that changes my programming for the moment, then where did I have my free will last? Before I changed it, or you know, was having the one drink too many the last of my free will, or is my choice to throw the bones as they will when I get drunk and do something stupid?
Your free will was never there. When you took that first drink, it was the consequence of all the factors immediately prior to that and long prior to that. And when you decided to stop, that was also the consequence of all those factors. And when you decided to go on, it was a consequence. And all that happened as you got more and more drunk or more and more drugged was other chemicals moved into ascendance and took more control over you. You know, we have a daughter, Leon and I, as most of you know here, I think, who's schizophrenic. And she lives in a world quite different from ours. She doesn't really tell us about it, but we have some idea that it's just a completely different world. And since I've realized that all of our worlds are illusory and not under our control, under the control of these various things that make us up, that drive us to behave in this way or that, I've realized she's not all that different from us. Hers is just a different delusion. Unfortunately, hers doesn't lead her to live a particularly healthy lifestyle or do the things that we enjoy. But who knows, in her own head, maybe she's doing wonderful things, I don't know. Ours is very positive in the sense, Leon has sometimes said to me, why do we have music? Why would that have evolved? What for? And I say the same thing. For a species to want to survive and to want to thrive, it has to have things that give it pleasure. To want to procreate, after all, we have to enjoy sex. To want to keep going, life has got to have something good for us. And I think that those things got selected from the genome because they helped our species survive and thrive.
I would like to venture answer your question about the illusion of people taking or doing something and so forth. And to that, we must go to the source of power, and that is taking responsibility. If you see somebody throwing a banana peel on the street, do you walk past, or do you go and pick up and put it in the bin? If you do that, that's empowering, and that's the source of power. And that is the key in taking responsibility. So I think that leads to what you call the illusion of somebody achieving something and having of what his achievement was. And then on to the second question in the same vein, in terms of meaning of life, surely there must be more to meaning of life, and maybe in terms of what is our contribution to society, to the world destiny of whatever, if you take responsibility, then you can maybe, and everyone can unlock that potential. And then also, whether it's a criminal or
Well, certainly we have in our moral systems, in our cultures, in our way of thinking, most of us regard taking responsibility as very important. I would just say that that is also illusory, because whatever you're going to do, regardless. But that doesn't mean to say that it's a bad thing, a bad quality to preserve in the culture, as is kindness, as is generosity, as is numerous positive things. Because we do learn. We learn by example. Our software learns. We learn by example. We learn from our experience. We learn in numerous ways. The fact that what I'm saying is that process is inevitable. You may feel as if you initiated that, picking up the banana, but you were going to pick up that banana peel because of everything that went before. Or you were not going to because of everything that went before. So all these are good things that we feel. They help our society function, and they've been evolved as part of our software because they were good functioning things. But the idea that you are responsible is the one that maybe you need to have a little bit of thought about. Actually, am I a good person because I decided to pick up the banana skin? Or is it just because I was lucky, I was brought into a family that had that kind of culture, that taught that kind of thing, and cause and effect and cause and effect and cause and effect and everything else that goes into it, I picked up the banana skin.
But, sorry, just picking up the banana peel gives you power. If you didn't pick it up,
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Doing things gives you power.
So what is the source of power? Just as you say, luck.
Agree.
Right. Quantum physicists, from what reading I've done, now believe that the universe is indeterminate, mainly due to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. They cannot define both the position and energy or speed of any particle at any time. They can only define one or two parameters, and they say this opens up the universe to unpredictability. But that leads to other inconsistencies in their view. And I just recently read of a guy who has resolved those inconsistencies by proposing a multiverse, the multiverse. And it's so vast, it's hard for us to possibly conceive of it. But if we just think of the complexity of DNA, then the multiverse says that at every instant of your life, at every decision you make, you hive off into a different universe, constantly hiving off into different universes. And each of those universes you could look at deterministically. You can see everything that was going to happen and will happen in that universe if you look at it taking the God's eye view. But your path through these multiverses, endlessly weaving back and forth based on the decisions you make, that is where the source of your non-determinism, your sense of choice arises. So it's not widely accepted that there is an alternative theory out there.
Well, you just contradicted yourself there, Trevor, because you said where you end up in the multiverse based on the decisions you've just taken. So it's still cause and effect. I'm not saying there isn't a multiverse, and certainly I think I agree that there's randomness built into the system, and we can't say where everything's going. But whether there's a multiverse or whatever there is, it's all, in the end, cause and effect. There can't be an effect without a cause.
They tend to agree that the ultimate God's eye view is looking at every universe, you can see the end consequences of
But are they saying that you can get there without anything happening before?
No.
Okay, so I said I wasn't going to get into that debate.
Two more questions if you can, and then we'll have to move outside because they're actually starting to get late. So we're going to move, and we have to, unfortunately, almost 40 minutes.
I quite like what Trevor had to say there, and I think it fits in a strange way with what I like to say. I'm not going to provide an answer, but the first time, this is a philosophical question, and I think the premise of determinists is cause and effect. It all comes down to cause and effect, and one can observe that in a very scientific and objective way. And the first time I sort of dealt with this deeply troubling philosophical question was in studying ancient Greece. And the ancient Greeks believed that they had free will, but they also believed that their pathway was determined by the gods. And so you had this very strange interrelationship between Odysseus making his own choices, but at the same time appealing to the gods to make sure that the pathway he was supposed to travel on was blessed, or whatever it might be. So if we look at free will or no free will as being a deterministic objective, we can objectively prove that any effect is caused by something before that, which I think is the key premise behind this. We also once believed that matter existed in a single place. Yet quantum physics has just now taught us that from a scientific point of view, matter can exist in one place and exist in another place at the exact same time. Also, you can have light shining through a pinhole, and if you observe it from one point of view, those particles you can see reflected on a wall, and they don't exist on the other side of the wall. Yet you can observe it from another perspective, and you will see those particles existing there. The mere fact of observation creates the reality. So I'm just proposing that what if we have both free will and our lives are deterministic, and perhaps the possibility, I don't know, of a multiverse does allow us to have both of those options. It's a question that I haven't quite answered, but perhaps something to think about.
I just don't see what all these quantum issues have to do with us making choices or decisions that come from nowhere. All those quantum things, we may not understand how those quantum effects are caused, and we don't. And I don't think anybody does. But what's that got to do with us suddenly deciding to lift up that chair and that having nothing coming before it that made me do that? They're two completely different issues.
But you can take two pathways or multiple.
Well, but they've all still got some kind of cause.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it doesn't alter that, it just makes it more random.
We'll have to wrap up, please. I know there's a lot of discussions, a lot of debate, a lot of people are sad that we have to close for us, but maybe we could come back at this after tea time if there's still some questions, because we'll see. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Last question, please.
Francis, you attributed several times the source of our particular position to the question of luck. And of course, if we pick up the...
or bad luck.
Yes, good luck, bad luck, but luck.
Yeah.
Is it necessary to explore what the content of luck is? And do we ultimately come to the conclusion that it's some form of deity? In other words, something that, in a Calvinistic sense, prescribes what is our destiny one way or the other, because it seems to me you foreclose the debate by not exploring that issue.
Well, I think it's random. I mean, it's the luck of the draw. Your genes, your parents get together, your fetuses comes together, and then it's the luck of the draw. Do you have good, positive, helpful genes? Are your parents kind to you? Do they beat you up? Because if they beat you up, the epigenetics will send you off behaving in other ways. And certainly the luck affects the whole train of your life, but that's just luck. That's all.
Let's keep talking. Thank you, Francis. Okay, so